Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Akrofi. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow working jointly with the United Nations University Institute for the Advanced Study of Sustainability in Japan and Kyoto University. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share my research in this conference. So my presentation today focuses on the intersection of Sustainable Development Goals and local governance in Ghana, particularly looking at the extent and potential impacts of localizing the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is the outline of my presentation. Briefly, I will give a context of the study and then some results that I've had to date and a few key conclusions that have been drawn. So by way of introduction, the SDGs were launched in 2015 as a global agenda for sustainable development by 2030. And while these goals have been formulated at a global level, translating them into action actually happens at a local level, where national and local governments translate these goals in alignment with their own priorities and local contexts. And this process is what is referred to as SDGs localization. So localizing the SDGs ensures that the global ambitions of these goals are tailored to meet the unique socioeconomic and cultural as well as environmental realities of local contexts, thereby making these goals also more relevant and actionable at the grassroots level. Now, in Ghana, localizing the SDGs is enabled by a decentralized planning system. So Ghana has been pursuing a decentralization policy since 1993, which is put in effect by an act of parliament. And this is a very important aspect of development planning and implementation at a subnational level in Ghana. At present, there's been very few studies on SDGs localization in the Ghanaian context, and these studies are focused on how the SDGs have been framed at a local level, and also some of the factors that affect localization across different local government units. In the wider literature, most of the studies on localization have looked at how various subnational or national entities are translating these goals. And the approach to this has been mostly qualitative. And also there's been some focus on how these SDGs are being implemented. But whether such localization actually leads to the achievement or attainment of sustainable development outcomes and also quantitative studies that attempt to study the relationship between localization and key development outcomes at a local level is an area that is not fully explored. So the aim of this study is to provide a quantitative account of first, the extent to which the SDGs are localized in Ghana. And in this study, I cover 138 districts. So districts are the local government units in Ghana. And then second, the study seeks to examine the relationship between these localized SDG targets and their associated development outcomes at subnational level. So the sources of data for this study are basically local government plans, which is the 2018 and 2022 local government plans. We call them the medium-term development plans. And also for the socioeconomic indicators, I use demographic and health surveys data for the year 2022. So the data was obtained through a series of iterative processes, first by manually studying the plans, a sample of 5 of them to see how various local governments have localized these SDGs as to how they integrate the SDGs targets. So in Ghana, there's a guideline provided by the National Development Planning Commission on how each local government unit should integrate these goals into their plans. So there's a template for that. But to ensure that this localization is consistent, I studied the plans manually first. And then secondly, due to the huge volume of the documents, I used artificial intelligence, which is ChatGPT 4.0, to also study how, if this AI can extract the targets from the plan. So I compared the manually extracted ones with the AI extracted ones, and then there were no discrepancies observed in that. So after that, I now prompted the AI to write a Python code, which was later executed in a Jupyter Notebook to extract all the targets from the 138 local government plans. So in Ghana, we have districts, and districts are subsets of regions. So as of now, we have 16 regions. So the data for the demographic and health service data, yes, is only available at the regional level. So because of that, I had to aggregate the SDGs targets into regions. So we have 14 data was available for 14 regions. And the data was primarily analyzed using descriptive analysis and visualizations, and to establish the relationship between the localized targets and the socioeconomic development outcomes, I use the Spearman correlation analysis. So this table on the right sort of shows an example of how the local government units integrate or localize the SDGs. So under a section of the plan known as development dimensions, goals, issues, policy objectives, and strategies, each of them is supposed to outline their key policy objectives and strategies, and specifically mention which SDG targets that these strategies are addressing. So all the districts have this table in their plans, which makes it easier to extract the targets. So by far, the results shows that 78%, which is 132 out of the 169 SDG targets, have been localized in Ghana by various local government units. And then 52% of the districts in 12 out of 14 regions have localized at least one SDG target. So looking at the distribution, it's can be seen that the localization is not consistent across all regions. You can see the variations from the box plots, but then the most localized SDG is SDG number 1, number 3, and number 4, basically relating to basic needs, which sort of shows that local governments prioritize SDGs that are related to basic needs as compared to, for example, SDG 13, SDG 14, and SDG 15, which have to do more with the environment. Also, SDG 16 and 17 were relatively quite focused on. But in terms of the specific targets, the most localized target was SDG target 16.6, which is to develop effective, accountable, and transparent institutions at all levels. This shows that between the period of 2018 and 2022, the topmost priority for all local governments was to ensure transparent and accountable governance mechanisms in their various jurisdictions. Now, here's the results of the correlation analysis. So to summarize it briefly, as there are so many variables in here, we'll look at the most significant ones. So overall, SDG number 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure, show the most significant correlations with the socioeconomic development outcomes. Specific ones include, for example, population with access to electricity, improved sanitation facility, and internet. So in regions where the SDG number 9, most of the targets of this goal have been localized, these regions also tend to have a higher proportion of people who have access to electricity. And then we can also observe that there are negative correlations, for example, between the proportion of children stunted and SDG 1, SDG 2, and then SDG 3. So these goals relate to poverty, to hunger, and then to health. So districts that sort of prioritize these goals also tend to have lower proportion of children who are stunted, which is related to malnutrition. And then the third key finding is that the population in the lowest wealth quintile also correlate negatively with most SDGs, particularly SDG number 9, which is infrastructure, industry, and infrastructure, and then SDG number 4. So this generally shows that localizing the SDGs potentially has the ability to also drive key outcomes, even though the key limitations of this correlation analysis is that it only shows the association, but does not mean there's any causation in there. So 3 key conclusions have been reached, and the first one is that localizing the SDGs in Ghana associates strongly with several socioeconomic development outcomes. And this sort of highlights the importance of empowering local governments to translate these global goals into their local context. However, SDGs related to climate action and environmental sustainability have not received much attention, as seen earlier. Most local governments focus on SDGs that relate to basic needs. And given the limitations of the correlation analysis, it is recommended that future research should employ more robust analysis like multivariate regression to study if there's any causation between localizing these targets. Of course, there are so many mediating variables, and just localizing the SDGs alone will not translate directly into these socioeconomic development outcomes. There are so many factors, and it will be interesting to be able to model all these factors in future studies. So thank you very much again for the opportunity to share this research, and please feel free to leave your comments under the presentation section on the conference platform, or please feel free to reach out to me via my email or connect with me on LinkedIn. Once again, thank you very much for your attention and for your interest in my presentation.